Hey there, gang. So previously we talked about starting your rig with reverb and then building your drive and fuzz section before you go into your modulation and other effects. And then we talked a little bit about compression, but we never talked about EQ. I hinted at it. We're going to talk about that now. One of the things I want you to try to avoid with EQ, if you do use EQ in your rig, I recommend that you do, if you can afford the pedal board space to have an EQ pedal on your board, it can be used very effectively. In many ways, it can be used as a boost. It can be used to clean up your signal. It can be used in certain scenarios for gigs where, you're using a pickup amp, a stage amp, and it's not something you're used to, so you can adjust that, right? There's many ways an EQ can be really helpful. If you're using modeling, to me, it's almost essential. But here's how I want you to think about it, is don't think about it in many small cuts or boosts, because you're gonna end up getting some really freaky phasing and sterile sounds, really. Like, for instance, if any of you have the FabFilter or any other EQ that has, a spectral response, you can see, and it'll tell you where it's peaking, and okay, you need to look at this and look at that. If you started cutting all of the frequencies it told you to, and maybe you've done this, it sounds like crap, right? So I want you to think about broader strokes. That means wider cues, less cuts and boosts, but having them be broader, right? Like maybe a little lift around 110 hertz, a nice little round lift, not too broad a cue down there, just a nice little lift for shape, right? And then maybe a nice little cut, a semi-broad cue, not super wide, not super narrow, just to clean up the low mids a little bit. And when I'm talking about little, I'm talking about you can do, we're talking mastering cuts and boosts here, like maximum 1 dB. Do you know what I mean? Like maximum 1 dB, maybe 1.5. Sometimes I'm cutting 0.5, 0.6, depending on the guitar, on the rig, and the effects you're using, okay? Keep it broader, keep less cuts and boosts, and watch out for that 2.5 frequency. That 2.5 kilohertz frequency, that gets real annoying over time, building up with other instruments. Yes, it sounds great to you in your room, yeah, okay, crank that up, and a lot of devices do this, but boy, does it sound like crap when you start layering guitars or layering with other instruments. It gets really annoying. It's a proven fact that it'll turn the listener off. So gentle little boosts you could do, like I said, you could boost a little at 110 hertz, cut a little bit in the low mids, just a little bit, just your shaping. Think of it as shaping, right? A lot of you know this, come on. But just don't get carried away. Don't get a spectral EQ and start going freaking crazy, because oh my God, does that sound like crap. And so do a little boost at 110, around 110, depends on your guitar and your amp. A little cut in the low mids, maybe if there's some mud. Don't be afraid of the 500 to 700 hertz range, because sometimes a nice little lift, and again, I mean a little lift, like 0.6 dB, but very broad cue, very wide cue through there could be very interesting and give you some heft and some snap without making it peaky. And then instead of 2.5, maybe a little bit at 1.2, and then don't be afraid also to cut off, say, above 8 or 10 kilohertz, because speaker cabinets do not reproduce much above that that's worth anything, right? Technically. I mean, yes, it all adds up, but above 8 to 10K, you could start to shape roll off there. You can also roll off below 70 or 80 hertz if you want. And all of that, because what happens when you shape the low end and the super high end, other things get accentuated, which is usually the mids. So just be gentle with your EQs, wider cues, broader strokes, not as exaggerated boosts and cuts, and you'll start to see some pretty neat and well-recorded results that will stack better amongst your own guitars and with other instruments. So don't be afraid of that. Look at that as a possibility. And if you're using an EQ for boost, of course, you can cut certain lows and accentuate certain mids and push the gain a little bit for a boost. That's a different thing. I'm talking overall shaping of your guitar signal. Just be gentle. Be gentle. Cool? All right. We'll talk about something else next time.